My brother drained mom's $340K while telling her I abandoned her. Bank records exposed everything. That's the headline they'd write, isn't it? The number still makes my stomach clench. $340,000. It wasn't just the money, though. It was the calculated rot, the slow poison seeping into everything I thought was solid. It was realizing the man who'd sat beside me at Thanksgiving, the one I'd shared scraped knees and whispered secrets with under the covers, was a meticulously crafted lie. I was sitting at my own kitchen island, the weak morning light filtering through the blinds, the same cheap laminate countertop I'd spilled milk on 1,000 times as a kid, scrolling through PDFs on my laptop. Bank statements, activity logs, every single transaction, dated, timed, and signed with a digital flourish that felt like a slap. My brother, Mark. He'd been chipping away at it for years, small amounts at first, then bigger chunks, all while Mom, bless her fading mind, believed I was the one who'd gone radio silent. The whole thing started, or at least the overt signs began to surface, about 2 years ago. Mom had been diagnosed with early-stage Alzheimer's. It was devastating, a slow unraveling of the woman who'd always been the anchor of our small but fiercely loyal family. My dad had passed away a decade prior, leaving Mom alone with us kids, me and Mark. We were the two pillars of her universe, or so she'd always said. I lived about an hour away, married to a good man, a lawyer named David, and we were building our own life. Mark, ever the dutiful son in her eyes, lived just 10 minutes from her sprawling, slightly neglected colonial house out in the country. He was single, always had been, dedicated to his projects, and always around Mom. He'd always been the one she leaned on, the one who handled her bills, the one who took her to doctor's appointments. I chucked it up to proximity, to his availability. I'd visited as often as I could, squeezing in weekends, late afternoon drives after work, trying to be present. But the further she slipped, the harder it became. The conversations grew circular. The recognition in her eyes flickered. It was exhausting, emotionally draining in a way nothing else ever had been. That's when the calls from Mom started to change. They became accusatory. Not overtly, not at first. It was always couched in concern. Honey, are you okay? You haven't called in a while. Then it would morph into, Mark said you were having some trouble. Is everything all right? Trouble? What trouble? I was working at a respectable law firm, not a Fortune 500, but a solid, well-respected regional practice. David and I were comfortable. We weren't struggling. No, Mark, everything's fine. Why would you tell Mom I'm having trouble? And his answers were always vague, smooth. Oh, you know, she just worries. I'm just trying to reassure her you're okay. Reassure her. That's rich. The real shift, the gut punch realization, came around Christmas last year. Mom was getting worse. Her memory was a sieve. She'd forget who I was for minutes at a time. Then her eyes would light up with recognition, and she'd hug me like I'd been gone for years. It was heartbreaking. I'd brought David with me for the holidays, and Mark was there, of course. He was always there. He was the good son. He cooked the dinner, he made sure Mom took her pills, he managed the whole damn thing. I felt like an outsider, a guest in my own mother's house, thanks to my own brother. He had this way of making me feel inadequate, of highlighting my perceived failures, all under the guise of sibling solidarity. Mom's having a tough time, Sarah. It's hard for her when you're not around as much. She needs stability. He'd say it with a sigh, a weary indulgence that implied I was the one causing the instability. During one of those strained holiday dinners, Mom, in a moment of clarity that was both a blessing and a curse, said, Sarah, your brother said you've been so busy with your fancy law firm, you haven't had time for your old mother. Is that true? My heart dropped. David's hand found mine under the table, a silent anchor. Mark, across from me, gave a small, almost imperceptible shake of his head, a look of deep disappointment etched on his face. It was a performance, and I was the unwitting villain. Mom, that's not true at all, I managed, my voice tight. I love you. I'm here as much as I can be. Mark has been telling you things that aren't accurate. He immediately jumped in, his voice calm, reasonable. Now, Sarah, don't make it sound like I'm putting words in your mouth. Mom was just asking. I told her you've been swamped, that you've been working late, that it's a demanding career. That's all. I'm just trying to manage her expectations so she doesn't get her hopes up and then feel let down. His eyes met mine, and for the first time, I saw something cold and calculating in them. It wasn't just concern for Mom. it was something else, a subtle assertion of control. After that holiday, the visits became even harder. Mom would ask why I wasn't around more. She'd repeat things Mark had told her. He'd accidentally let slip things about my life that were taken out of context, painting me as distant, preoccupied, even self-absorbed. It was a slow, insidious campaign of character assassination. I tried to talk to Mark about it, to confront him directly. Mark, why are you telling Mom these things? It's not fair. It makes me look bad, and it's upsetting her. His response was always the same. A sigh, a shrug, a dismissive wave of his hand. Sarah, you're being overly sensitive. I'm just being honest. You are busy, and Mom's getting older. She needs to know what's going on. I'm the one here, day in and day out, dealing with her. You swoop in for a weekend and then disappear. It's the reality. The reality. His curated reality. The final straw, the moment that propelled me into digging, was when Mom's financial advisor called me. He was a kindly man, Mr. Henderson, who'd managed her investments for years. He was clearly uncomfortable. Sarah, I'm a bit concerned, he'd said, his voice hushed. I've been receiving instructions from Mark regarding your mother's accounts. He's been quite aggressive in withdrawing funds lately, large sums. He claims it's for her care, for home improvements, but it's quite a significant amount. And he's also requested some changes to the beneficiary designations. He's asked for paperwork that would essentially reroute things should anything happen. My blood ran cold. Beneficiary designations? Mark is changing Mom's beneficiaries? I'd asked, my voice trembling. He is, Mr. Henderson confirmed. And he's also been liquidating some of her older, more stable investments, moving funds into less secure ventures, he claims. It's all quite unusual, Sarah. Your mother, she doesn't seem to grasp the implications. That conversation with Mr. Henderson was the trigger. David, bless him, saw the terror in my eyes. He didn't need me to spell it out. He knew Mark. He'd always found him a little too slick, a little too charming. Let me see those bank statements, Sarah, David said, his lawyerly instincts kicking in. He'd helped me get the access, navigating the privacy laws and the bank's bureaucracy. It was a painstaking process. I'd requested statements going back 5 years, trying to piece together the timeline. And then I found it, the pattern, the slow bleed. Mark had been systematically draining Mom's savings, not just for care or home improvements, though there were a few transactions that could be vaguely explained away. No, this was different. It was consistent withdrawals, often in round numbers, deposited directly into his personal accounts. There were transfers to credit cards, payments to businesses I'd never heard of, and then the truly damning ones, large sums deposited into offshore accounts, the details of which were deliberately obscured. The dates aligned with Mark's claims that I was distant, that I wasn't contributing, that he was shouldering the financial burden of Mom's care. He'd been painting himself as the martyr, the sole caretaker, while secretly siphoning off her legacy. The timing of the larger withdrawals coincided with periods when I'd been particularly active in Mom's life, when I tried to step in and take over some of the caregiving duties. It was a calculated move. The more I tried to be involved, the more he seemed to tighten his grip, and the more he'd subtly undermine me to Mom. He was systematically isolating her from me, not just emotionally, but financially too. The $340,000 was just the tip of the iceberg. There were also the investments Mr. Henderson had mentioned, the ones he was liquidating. The numbers in those statements were a physical blow. It was pure, unadulterated betrayal. The man who'd always been my protector, my partner in childhood mischief, had turned into a predator, preying on our mother's vulnerability. He'd used her failing mind as a shield, her love for me as a weapon against me. He'd convinced her I was the one who'd abandoned her, while he was the one who was actually stealing from her, piece by piece. And the worst part? The sheer, cold effectiveness of his plan. He'd played the loving son so perfectly, I'd almost believed it myself. Almost. The silence that followed my discovery wasn't a peaceful quiet. It was the thrumming, buzzing silence of a bomb about to detonate. I sat there, staring at the screen, the weight of the evidence crushing me. The humiliation of his lies to Mom, the exclusion he'd engineered, was nothing compared to the profound, sickening realization of what he'd done. And the control he'd wielded, not just over Mom's money, but over her perception of me. The bank records had exposed everything, but the real work, the work of dismantling Mark's carefully constructed facade, was just beginning. The weak morning light that had felt benign earlier now seemed accusatory, highlighting every dust mote dancing in the air as if they were tiny witnesses to my brother's avarice. I kept scrolling, my eyes blurring, my jaw clenched so tight I thought my teeth might crack. It wasn't just the sheer volume of money, the $340K that was already a gaping wound. It was the how, the finesse, the slow, insidious erosion of my mother's assets disguised as diligent financial management. There were transfers to what looked like shell corporations, disguised as investments in exotic, high-yield opportunities. Mark had always fancied himself a bit of a wheeler dealer, dabbling in crypto and penny stocks, always talking about the next big score that never materialized. Now, it seemed, he'd found a way to finance his ambitions using Mom's retirement. But there was something else, something I hadn't paid enough attention to at first glance. Hidden deeper in the account statements, tucked away in footnotes and appendices, were references to something called family trust restructuring. I had initially skimmed over them, assuming it was just standard estate planning jargon, something Mr. Henderson would have handled. But Mark's digital signature appeared on these documents too, often dated shortly after significant withdrawals. David, bless his meticulous mind, had pulled up copies of these trust documents from Mom's old legal files. They were complex, layered, designed to protect her assets and ensure they went to her children upon her death, or so I'd always understood. The truth, when it finally unfurled, was a cold, sharp shock that made me gasp. Mark hadn't just been draining Mom's liquid assets, he'd been systematically dismantling the very framework of her estate.
He'd used her diminished capacity, her trust in him, to essentially reroute substantial portions of her holdings, including the equity in her house and valuable stock portfolios, into sub-trusts that he and only he controlled. The family trust restructuring wasn't about protecting Mom. It was about Mark seizing control. He'd found loopholes, exploited ambiguities in the original documents, and manipulated Mom into signing off on amendments she couldn't possibly comprehend. Mr. Henderson had been trying to flag it, but Mark, with his smooth talk and feigned concern, had apparently convinced Mom to dismiss his worries as overzealousness, as a desire to hold onto her money longer than necessary. The implication was chilling. Mark wasn't just stealing her money, he was positioning himself to inherit a vastly inflated portion of her estate, effectively disinheriting me from significant assets that were rightfully mine, or at least that were meant to be divided equitably. This wasn't just about money. It was a calculated act of legal and financial theft disguised as familial duty. The humiliation of Mom's misplaced accusations, the sting of Mark's smug pronouncements about my absence, it all coalesced into a burning, incandescent rage. He hadn't just lied to Mom. He'd systematically rewritten our family's future, all while playing the role of the devoted son. I looked at David, his face grim, his brow furrowed in concentration as he reviewed the trust amendment documents. He'd been working late into the night, piecing together the financial puzzle, his usual calm demeanor replaced by a steely resolve. "Sarah," he said, his voice low and measured, but with an edge that sent a shiver down my spine. "This is worse than we thought. He's not just taking her savings. He's essentially restructured the trust to give himself primary control over everything. The house, the investments. He's got a way to access and reallocate a significant majority of her wealth. And the language here?" He pointed to a section, his finger tracing the dense legal text. "It's designed to be almost impossible to challenge, especially with Mom's current state. He's engineered it so that any dispute would require her active testimony, which, as we know, isn't viable." My hands trembled. This wasn't a mere sibling rivalry for inheritance. This was a meticulously planned heist. So, what? He's going to get it all? The question was barely a whisper, laced with disbelief. David shook his head, a grim smile playing on his lips. "Not necessarily. He's good, Sarah. Very good. He's used legal mechanisms to create a very strong position for himself. But he's also made assumptions. He's assumed Mom's complete incapacity and your complete disengagement. He's assumed you'd never look this closely. He's assumed you'd be too heartbroken or too overwhelmed to fight." He paused, meeting my gaze, and in his eyes I saw the reflection of my own burgeoning fury. And that's where he's made his mistake. The next few days were a blur of quiet intensity. I couldn't go to Mom. It would only cause her more distress, and Mark would undoubtedly spin it to his advantage, painting me as the aggressor, the one trying to exploit her. David and I spent hours poring over the documents, cross-referencing dates, tracing the flow of money, and building a timeline that would stand up in court. The sheer audacity of Mark's scheme was breathtaking. He'd manipulated Mom's affection, her reliance on him, into a legal weapon. He'd played on her fears of abandonment, her confusion about finances, and her declining memory, all to secure his financial future at her expense. The humiliation I'd felt at that Christmas dinner, the shame of Mom's accusations, now fueled a cold, precise anger. It wasn't the hot, impulsive rage of betrayal, but a simmering, deliberate resolve. Mark had underestimated me. He'd seen me as the distant daughter, the one too busy with her career, too easily manipulated. He'd assumed my emotional vulnerability would be my undoing. He was about to learn that vulnerability, when coupled with irrefutable evidence and a fierce protectiveness for what was right, could be a powerful, terrifying force. I remembered Mark's smug pronouncements about shouldering the burden, about being the one present, the one making sacrifices. It was all a performance. He'd manufactured the burden, then demanded applause for carrying it. And while he was doing that, he was systematically emptying the accounts that were supposed to provide for Mom's final years, and then for both of us. I replayed his words in my head, his smooth reassurances, his subtle digs at my life. "You're too sensitive, Sarah. Mom just needs stability. I'm the one here, day in and day out." He'd been laying the groundwork for this all along, subtly isolating me, chipping away at Mom's trust, all while amassing his fortune. David brought me another stack of papers. "This is interesting," he said, his voice tinged with a grim sort of triumph. "These are the financial records for the company Mark claims he was investing in, the one he said was his golden opportunity. It's a shell company, Sarah, registered to an offshore address with no real assets, no employees, and no discernible business operations. The money he transferred into it just disappeared. No trace. It's a classic money laundering front. He wasn't investing Mom's money. He was hiding it." The revelation hit me with the force of a physical blow. It wasn't just about him getting the inheritance. He was actively concealing stolen funds. He was a thief, a con artist, wearing the guise of the devoted son. The thought made me sick to my stomach, but also exhilarated. It meant we had him. We had proof of his deceit, of his outright criminal behavior. The next step was crucial. I couldn't go to Mark directly. I knew he'd lawyer up, deny everything, and spin another web of lies.
He was too clever for that. He'd anticipated confrontation. What he hadn't anticipated was being blindsided. We needed leverage. We needed something that would force his hand, something that would make him realize his carefully constructed world was about to crumble. "He thinks he's won," I said to David, my voice low and steady. "He thinks Mom is too sick to know, and I'm too weak to fight. He thinks he's in the clear." David nodded. He's been very thorough, but he's also been greedy, and he's been overconfident. The idea began to form in my mind, a dangerous, exhilarating prospect. It involved leveraging Mark's own tactics against him. He'd used Mom's perception of me against me. Now I would use his perception of his own control against him. I started with small things, subtle inquiries about Mom's well-being, not to her, but to her caregivers, the ones Mark had hired and paid. I'd always tried to be friendly with them, offering them a kind word, a small gift at holidays. I asked them about Mom's daily routine, her medications, anything that might shed light on Mark's ongoing manipulation. One of the caregivers, a woman named Brenda, who'd been with Mom for about a year, mentioned something that struck me. "Mr. Mark, he's always checking in," she'd said, her tone neutral. "He makes sure she takes her meds, but sometimes I think he's more interested in making sure she remembers what he tells her to remember. He'll talk about you, Miss Sarah, and how you're too busy, how you don't care. And then he'll ask Mom, 'Now, Mom, you remember that, don't you? You remember what Sarah's like.'" This confirmed my deepest fears. Mark wasn't just isolating Mom, he was actively coaching her, reinforcing his narrative of my abandonment. It was a cruel, calculated psychological manipulation. But it also gave me an idea. If he was so invested in Mom remembering his version of reality, what would happen if that reality started to fray at the edges? I decided to stage a carefully orchestrated accident. It was a risky gambit, but one that could achieve multiple objectives. It would force Mark to reveal his true colors, it would create an opening for me to speak with Mom without his immediate interference, and it would provide an opportunity to subtly introduce doubt into his narrative. A few weeks later, during a visit that Mark had orchestrated to help Mom with her finances, I made my move. I'd coordinated with David and a trusted investigator he'd brought onto the team. I arrived at Mom's house, a carefully constructed calm on my face, a knot of adrenaline churning in my stomach. Mark was there, of course, hovering, playing the concerned son, his eyes darting between me and Mom, assessing any perceived threat. Mom was seated at the dining room table, a confused, vacant look in her eyes, a sheaf of papers spread before her. Mark was pointing to them, his voice a low murmur. "See, Mom," he was saying, his tone patient, patronizing.
This just confirms what we discussed. You want to make sure everything is settled. Sarah can't really help with these things. She's got her own life, her own problems. But you and I, we've always been a team, haven't we? He looked up as I approached, a flicker of annoyance crossing his face, quickly replaced by his practiced smile. "Sarah, you made it. We were just going over some important paperwork. Mom's being so diligent." I smiled back, a tight, brittle smile. "That's great, Mark. I'm glad Mom's being taken care of." I turned to Mom, my voice soft. "Hi, Mom. How are you feeling today?" She blinked at me, her gaze unfocused. "Sarah?" she whispered, a hint of confusion. Then a flicker of recognition, a fragile smile. "Oh, Sarah, you came." Mark jumped in smoothly. "She's been asking about you, Sarah, but you know how it is, so busy." And then I executed my plan. I accidentally knocked over a glass of water, letting it cascade across the papers Mark had laid out. It wasn't a huge spill, but enough to create immediate chaos and a visible mess. Mark swore under his breath, his composure cracking for the first time. "Sarah, what the hell? You've ruined them." I feigned distress. "Oh my God, Mark, I am so sorry. I'm such a klutz. I didn't mean to." While Mark was scrambling to salvage the papers, dabbing at them with napkins, his face a mask of pure frustration, I knelt beside Mom. Her eyes were wide, a mixture of fear and confusion. "Mom," I whispered, my voice urgent. "It's okay, it's just water. Mark is overreacting. He's always overreacting." Her gaze flickered from the dripping papers to Mark, then back to me. The carefully constructed narrative Mark had built was starting to show cracks under the pressure of the unexpected. For a fleeting moment, in her eyes, I saw a glimmer of something sharp, something almost lucid. It was the flicker of doubt, the seed of suspicion. Mark straightened up, glaring at me, his jaw tight. "You're unbelievable, Sarah. Absolutely unbelievable. Mom's trying to sort out her affairs and you pull this stunt?" I met his gaze, and for the first time, I let the cold fury that had been simmering beneath the surface show. Stunt, Mark? Or a moment of clarity? "Mom, are you sure you want Mark making these decisions for you? Are you sure this is what you want?" Mom looked at the papers, then at Mark, then at me. Her brow furrowed. "Mark, what is this?" she mumbled, her voice wavering. Mark immediately stepped in, his voice smooth, almost soothing. "It's just a review, Mom, making sure everything is in order. You know, to make sure everything's safe. Sarah doesn't understand these things." I watched the subtle shift in Mom's expression. The confusion was still there, but now it was tinged with a nascent uncertainty. She was looking at the papers, her hand hovering over them as if they were foreign objects. The accident had disrupted Mark's flow, his control. It had created a space, however small, for Mom's own thoughts, her own instincts to surface. "Sarah's right, Mark," I said, my voice deliberately low and calm. "Mom, you don't have to sign anything you don't understand. David, my husband, he's a lawyer. He can explain these things to you. He can make sure everything is fair and honest." Mark's eyes narrowed. The mention of David, the lawyer, was clearly not part of his plan. He'd designed this whole process to exclude any outside legal counsel, relying on Mom's confusion and my perceived absence. "I don't need any lawyers involved," Mark said, his voice hardening. "This is a private family matter. Mom and I have it handled." He turned to Mom, his face a mask of concern. "Mom, don't listen to Sarah. She's just trying to stir things up. She's always been jealous." Jealous. The word hung in the air, a bitter accusation. But Mom's gaze was fixed on the papers, her hand still hovering uncertainly. The carefully constructed facade of Mark's devoted son was beginning to crack, revealing the desperate manipulator beneath. The humiliation I'd felt earlier, the feeling of being cast out, was replaced by a steely, almost terrifying resolve. He had played his hand, and now it was time for me to play mine. The power shift wasn't complete, but the tectonic plates were shifting, groaning under the pressure of unearthed truths and simmering vengeance. I could see it in Mark's eyes, a dawning realization that his carefully laid plans were starting to unravel, that his assumptions about me and about Mom had been fatally flawed. And that, in itself, was a victory. A small but deeply satisfying victory.
The silence that followed, broken only by the faint drip of water from the spilled glass, was no longer the silence of shock, but the pregnant, anticipatory silence of an inevitable confrontation. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating, punctuated only by the frantic, almost pathetic attempts Mark was making to blot up the spilled water. His face, usually a picture of calm control, was contorted with a raw, unvarnished panic. He looked like a child caught with his hand in the cookie jar, except the cookies were Mom's life savings, her legacy. And I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that this was the moment the carefully constructed illusion of his devotion began to shatter, revealing the avarice beneath. Mom was watching him, her expression unreadable, a delicate dance between confusion and something else, something that looked suspiciously like dawning suspicion. She'd always been perceptive, even through the fog of her illness. Mark had relied on her dulled senses, her trusting nature, but that moment of chaos, that disruption of his meticulously planned script, had given her a sliver of an opening I intended to pry wide. "It's fine, Mark," I said, my voice a low, steady hum that cut through his frantic blustering. "Accidents happen."
Especially when important documents are involved. Documents that Mom might not fully understand. Documents that could change her entire future. I let my gaze linger on him, challenging him to deny it. He straightened up, his eyes flashing, the veneer of brotherly concern evaporating like mist. "Don't be dramatic, Sarah. Mom and I are handling this. We always have." He turned back to Mom, his voice adopting that overly sweet, patronizing tone he used when he thought he had someone cornered. "You're doing great, Mom. Just a little water, nothing to worry about. We'll just get some fresh copies. You want to make sure everything's clear, right? For your peace of mind." He was pushing, trying to regain control, trying to force her compliance. But the doubt had been planted. I could see it in the slight tremor of her hand as she reached for a damp paper, and the way her eyes darted between Mark and me. The seed of suspicion, nurtured by the unexpected spill, by my pointed questions, was beginning to take root. "Peace of mind?" I repeated, a slow, dangerous smile curving my lips. "Or assurance that certain arrangements are irreversible. Mom, do you know what family trust restructuring means? Do you know how much of your estate is being moved and where it's going?" Mark flinched, a barely perceptible movement, but I saw it. He'd hoped I wouldn't bring up the specifics. Not here, not now, not with Mom present. He'd banked on my emotional restraint, on my unwillingness to upset her. He was wrong. My restraint had been a strategic tool, and now it was time to deploy the full force of my rage, my grief, and my undeniable proof. "Sarah, you're upsetting Mom," Mark said, his voice tight with forced calm. "This isn't the time or place for this. We're just going over things, standard procedure." "Standard procedure?" I scoffed, taking a step closer, my voice rising slightly but still controlled. "Standard procedure is hiding millions in shell corporations, Mark? Standard procedure is manipulating your own mother into signing away her assets so you can fund your speculative ventures? Because that's what the documents say, Mark. That's what the investigation has uncovered." His face went pale, a stark contrast to his usual ruddy complexion. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He was stunned. He'd expected me to be emotional, perhaps even hysterical. He hadn't expected me to be precise, to have evidence, to be armed with a legal strategy. "What investigation?" he finally managed to croak out, his eyes darting around as if searching for an escape route. "The one that revealed your golden opportunity was a money laundering front," I said, my voice laced with ice. "The one that uncovered the systematic dismantling of Mom's trust, disguised as restructuring. The one that shows you've been siphoning off her funds for years, Mark. Years. While you were playing the dutiful son, the responsible caregiver, you were bleeding her dry." Mom's eyes widened, and she reached a trembling hand towards the papers, her lips moving silently. The fog of confusion was starting to lift, replaced by a dawning horror. She understood more than Mark ever gave her credit for. She understood the implication of theft, of betrayal, of her own son preying on her. Mark, seeing the shift in Mom, scrambled to recover. He grabbed her hand, his grip too tight, his eyes pleading. "Mom, don't listen to her. She's confused. She's always been difficult. She wants to make trouble." He turned to me, his voice a venomous hiss. "You're just bitter because you weren't here. You didn't do the work. Now you want to swoop in and take what's rightfully mine."
Rightfully yours? I laughed, a sharp, brittle sound devoid of any mirth. You call theft rightful? You call manipulation fair play? I wasn't here because I had a life, Mark, a career, a family. I trusted you to look after Mom, and you've used that trust to commit financial crimes. And the only thing I'm here to take is justice for Mom, and for the years of lies you fed us all. David's investigator, a quiet man named Agent Sterling, stepped forward, holding a sleek tablet. Mrs. Davison, he said, his voice respectful but firm, addressing Mom directly. My name is Sterling. I'm working with Sarah and her husband, David. We've compiled a comprehensive report detailing every transfer, every withdrawal, every questionable transaction made from your accounts over the past 7 years. It paints a very clear picture of Mr. Mark Davison's activities. He turned the tablet towards Mom. On the screen, a complex web of transactions appeared, highlighted in red, showing the flow of money from Mom's accounts into offshore entities, then into various speculative investments that had all collapsed. There were dates, amounts, and Mark's digital signatures on amendments he'd orchestrated. It was irrefutable. It was devastating. Mom stared at the screen, her breath catching in her throat. She reached out a trembling finger, tracing the lines, her eyes widening with each passing moment. The confusion was gone, replaced by a stark, cold clarity. She saw her life's work, her security, her legacy, being systematically plundered by her own son. Mark, she whispered, her voice barely audible, laced with a pain that echoed through the room. You did this? Mark recoiled as if struck. He looked at Mom, then at Sterling's tablet, then back at me, his face a mask of desperation. The smug confidence he'd worn for so long had vanished, leaving behind a hollow, terrified man. Mom, it's not what it looks like, he stammered, his voice cracking. I was trying to grow your money, make it work for you. The market was volatile. These were investments, high risk, high reward. High reward for whom, Mark? I interjected, my voice sharp. Because it certainly wasn't for Mom, and volatile doesn't explain the shell corporations.
It doesn't explain the lack of any legitimate business operations. It explains nothing but your deliberate intent to steal. Mom pulled her hand away from Mark's, her expression hardening. The fragile confusion that had defined her recent years was replaced by a flicker of her old strength, the sharp intelligence I remembered from my childhood. She looked at Mark, and in her eyes I saw not pity, but a profound disappointment, a deep, soul-crushing betrayal. You lied to me, she said, her voice gaining strength, though it trembled with emotion. You told me you were taking care of everything. You told me you were protecting me. And all this time you were just taking. Mark finally broke. He slumped into a chair, his shoulders hunched, his head in his hands. The carefully crafted persona of the loving son had imploded. He was exposed, not just as a thief, but as a liar, a manipulator, a man who had preyed on his own mother's vulnerability. It was too much, he mumbled into his hands. Having to deal with everything, with you getting worse, with Sarah never being around. I needed the money. I needed to feel like I was in control. The admission hung in the air, pathetic and self-serving. He was trying to justify his actions, to garner sympathy, but all it evoked was disgust. Control, I repeated, my voice dangerously low. You wanted control, so you stole from the person who loved you most? You took advantage of her weakness? You know what, Mark? You're right. You're all about control. You controlled Mom's finances, you controlled her perception of me, and you tried to control the narrative. But you forgot one thing. I looked directly at him, my gaze unflinching. You forgot that Mom is still Mom, and that even in her diminished state, she knows betrayal when she sees it, and she feels it. Mom looked from Mark to me, a quiet resolve settling on her face. She took a deep breath. Sarah, she said, her voice clearer now, firmer. David, thank you. I didn't know. She turned to Mark, her expression one of pure, unadulterated grief and anger. Mark, get out. He looked up, his eyes wide with disbelief. Mom, what? I'm your son. You are not the son I raised, she said, her voice cutting like a razor. You are a stranger, a thief. Get out of my house, now. Mark stood, his legs unsteady. He looked at me, his eyes burning with a mixture of hatred and fear. He knew he was defeated. He knew the game was up. He'd played his hand too aggressively, too greedily, and now he was facing the consequences. He didn't say another word. He just turned and walked out the front door,
leaving behind a stunned silence and the wreckage of his lies. Agent Sterling neatly closed the tablet. "Mrs. Davidson," he said, "we have everything we need. Sarah and David will guide you through the legal process. We'll be in touch." Mom nodded, her gaze fixed on the door Mark had exited. Then, slowly, she turned to me.
Her eyes were filled with tears, but they were tears of pain, not of confusion. Tears of a mother finally seeing the truth, finally understanding the depth of her son's betrayal. "Oh, Sarah," she whispered, her voice breaking. She reached out her hand, and this time I took it. Her grip was strong, surprisingly strong. "I'm so sorry. I trusted him." I squeezed her hand, my own tears finally starting to fall. "It's okay, Mom. It's not your fault. He manipulated you. He took advantage." I looked at David, who stood beside me, his arm around my shoulders. "But it's over now. We're here. We'll make this right." The next few weeks were a whirlwind. David, with his legal acumen, moved swiftly. The evidence was overwhelming. Mark had no defense. The shell corporations, the fraudulent transfers, the manipulative trust amendments, it was all there, laid bare for the world to see. He was charged with multiple counts of fraud and embezzlement. The assets he'd attempted to hide were frozen, and the process of recovering what he'd stolen began. Mom, with David's guidance, began the arduous task of restoring her financial security, and more importantly, reclaiming her peace of mind. There was no dramatic courtroom scene, no tearful confrontation between siblings. Mark settled. He agreed to a plea deal, a fraction of his ill-gotten gains returned, and a sentence that, while not what I felt he deserved, ensured he wouldn't be able to harm anyone else for a significant period. The humiliation I'd felt at that Christmas dinner, the crushing weight of Mom's misplaced accusations, had been transmuted into a cold, unwavering resolve. And that resolve had led me here, to this moment, where the scales of justice, however imperfectly, were beginning to rebalance. Mom moved into a beautiful assisted living facility, not one Mark had chosen, but one we found together, a place filled with light and care. She was still Mom, still prone to moments of confusion, but the sharp edge of betrayal had softened, replaced by a quiet gratitude, a renewed sense of security. She was free from Mark's insidious control, free to simply be Mom. As for me, the journey had been brutal. It had unearthed a darkness I never knew existed within my own family. It had tested my strength, my resilience, my faith in the people I loved. But it had also shown me my own capacity for courage, for fierce protectiveness, for relentless pursuit of what was right. The betrayal had been deep, the wounds raw, but the healing had begun. Standing on the porch of Mom's old house, now empty and quiet, the afternoon sun warming my face, I took a deep, cleansing breath. The weight of years of unspoken resentments, of hidden truths, of a sibling's avarice, lifted from my shoulders. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. There were scars, and there would always be the memory of Mark's deception. But there was also a profound sense of peace, a victory, a quiet, hard-won triumph. The air smelled of honeysuckle and possibility, and for the first time in a long time, I felt truly, completely free.